I do feel myself getting a little bit sick, so my apologies in advance if I sound like shit. And on top of that, the mic that I used to hook up to my phone when I'm recording stopped working, so gonna sound especially like shit. But I did want to make this video because you all seem to have really enjoyed my rambly thoughts yesterday, and I figured, well, these videos are easy to make, and as you all know from my 40+ minute videos, I have a lot to say about all manner of things. But primarily this time around, I just finished reading Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triano, which was recommended to me time and time again as like a crowning jewel of extreme horror. It's sort of like the best specimen of its kind. Because in the past I've struggled with these titles just because I've found them to be very poorly constructed and uninspired. But I was told this was a big exception, and I read it, and I will agree that I see where that is coming from. That sentiment is coming from, especially due to the fact that this had a competent handle on grammar and sentence structure, which seems to be quite rare for indie extreme horror. So props on that front. And there were moments in here. It's particular. Well, it's about this psychotic girl who sets off on a journey with her disabled sister, who had a hand at. She had a hand in all that. Basically, they're going on this journey to find this key. So she's been given this mission by this serial killer that she's obsessed with. So it explores those kinds of relationships, very akin to what we see explored in The End of Alice by A.M. Holmes. But whereas in The End of Alice, it's just a constant exposure to the most sinister psychology ever constructed on the page, and it's told so believably and with a level of affect that really elevates it to being a visceral, confrontational, up close, and disgustingly intimate story. And I think disgustingly intimate is the way to write when you're trying to present the unwieldy heft of mental illness. But I just didn't feel any of that heft in here. And on top of that, the plot progression was really repetitive. There was just a myriad of useless characters that were just used to sort of like advance the plot forward. I think somebody in the Goodreads reviews compared this to like a Dora the Explorer episode, and it very much moves like that. Like they're looking for that one place, and on the way they meet this character and that character, and it was very much extreme Dora the Explorer tease. But ultimately, I ended up not really enjoying it. Like I said, the depiction of mental illness felt cartoonish, not heavy enough for my reading tastes. Plot progression was repetitive. Description, like the horror set pieces, felt kind of uninspired. It felt kind of like violence and transgression that we've seen before, and I just didn't really vibe with it. But I understand that this is like the third or fourth extreme horror title, indie extreme horror title, that I've given a bad review to. And I understand at this point I've built a sort of reputation as a hater of these kinds of books. Maybe I'm not doing it intentionally, is what I'm trying to say. But I have read and detested a few of these titles. So maybe, in the more literal sense, I guess I am a hater in that sense. But I just want to say, because this, like I said, was sold to me as like the extreme horror title of its kind to read, and I didn't vibe with it. And then I figured, okay, what's going on here, right? And I'm sure you're all wondering the same thing, because time and time again I get recommended extreme horror titles on here based on what my audience has seen that I enjoy, which is, dark, transgressive, disturbing fiction. It makes sense that I would enjoy something like this, right? But then I don't. And then towards the beginning of this journey, it baffled me just as much as it baffled my audience. But I think by now I've gotten a better handle of what's going on here. So that's what I'm going to try to explain. Right. So it's not so much going to be like, why do people like extreme horror, but more, why do people like this kind of extreme horror where I don't, even though it would make perfect sense for me to be all over stuff like this. So let's go ahead and try and explain that. So extreme horror, also known as hardcore horror, splatterpunk, whatever name has been put to it, it's a genre of horror that focuses primarily on violent set pieces and making them as extreme and explicit as possible. And it's just meant to be a constant assault on sensitivities and on limits and on artistic tastes of it. It's supposed to be like sort of like the more iconoclastic edge of horror, the more confrontational, violent, titillatingly pornographic. I think essentially extreme horror is what non-horror readers think all horror is. So it's that baseness It's that sort of concentrated baseness of all the sleaze and pulp and violence and explicitness of horror sort of boiled down into books like this. And of course, as you all know, if you all know me and the kinds of books that I enjoy and read, that is a mission statement that is very commendable, right? Because I feel like it even works sort of like as a facet of transgressive fiction, which is its own thing, but it's a thing highly concerned, through the definitions of thinkers like Bataille and Foucault. It's a genre concerned with limits and transgressing against these limits and pushing against these boundaries and crossing those limits. Transgression refers to that very evanescent moment of crossing, of breaking that taboo, and that's what transgressive fiction endeavors to represent time and time again. And with transgressive fiction and with some extreme horror, even, I have truly, truly looked in. You know how they say sometimes you find the face of God in art? That has been the personal journey that I've experienced, where I've really, and then informed by other thinkers like Julia Kristeva, uh, I've sort of built this image in my mind that I know what the powers of horror and objection and transgression are. I have seen how moving, how absolutely mind altering they can be for readers. I know the powers in writing explicit violence, where I've read authors like Guillotin, where I've read authors like Peter Sotos, people who really treat the subject of violence with the sort of dignified extremity that it calls for. But then you get books like this that are less concerned with that sort of more ontological and metaphysical definitions of what violence and transgression are. But they tear a page from the book of that philosophy, but sort of translated into just more genre laden thrills. It's more concerned with telling a horror story rather than showcasing some appalling transgressive set piece, right? But it does do that. But the way that it does it is sort of like woven into the intent of just wanting to shock and not explore the nature of that shock. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I'm going with. And I think it stands as an important reminder that I am not saying that this is a lesser form of art. I'm saying it's just seemingly very akin to the kind of books that I enjoy, but once we start to observe, we see the differences and we see why those differences don't work for readers like me. And I just kind of want to keep saying that. Okay, I don't want I don't want to come across like I'm shitting on this. I think, and I'm gonna get into this in a little bit, but I think that if you find that you have enjoyed extreme horror in the past and you don't mind the things that I mind, you will most definitely enjoy this. And like I said, this had a level of composition to it that I did find to be a notch above other titles similar to it that I've read. But I'm not trying to like shit on this art form. I'm just saying this is how it's very different from the kind of books that I enjoy. Because I think that this is a sort of more, what would you call it, abbreviated or abridged version of the philosophy that transgressive fiction endeavors to explore time and time again. Like I said, this is all about limits. And I think that books like this, even though they don't work for me, are crucial to defining this thing that we call reading taste or reading sensibilities. Because authors like Christopher Triana, and even authors that I will fully admit I've given 1-star ratings to their books, like Daniel Volpe, all of them. But I do find that their mission here on this spectrum of horror is crucial because these are writers that are writing at those frontiers of taste and propriety, like I said, and they are very much in charge of defining what taste is like for a horror reader, right? uh, Horror readers usually go to extreme horror, not to stay but to see how much they can handle, and then they recoil, and then there's some that just kind of hang out there forever, and nothing wrong with that. But it's about testing those limits, but I think in the safety of something more familiar, like genre thrills, like a more straightforward horror story. I think more inexperienced readers, and what I mean is inexperienced with reading transgression, I don't think that it would work out the same way for them to straightforward jump into an author like Guillotin or Peter Sotos. I think that this is more concerned with easing you into defining your limits, and on top of that, seeing, where you stand on the spectrum of extremity. And it's, I feel it's more accessible that way, because you're not getting like this lofty, dense sense of some kind of a decree on humanity, human nature, the way that you get with these other authors that I've enjoyed. But you still get that transgression, and it can still test your limits in that way. And I find that a lot of readers that I've been in communication with, who have read this, have said, this is the book that made me want to read more things like it. And then I stumbled across your channel and blah blah blah, and very touching. And I think extreme horror is the beginning of a lot of people's journeys into exploring some of this darker, more unsavory sides of fiction. And that is also conversely why it doesn't really work for me. I am a seasoned reader of the disturbing and macabre and unsavory. I've been reading books like this since I was like 14 or 15. I'm very invested, like I said, in studying this genre, not so much just reading it, though I do, of course, immensely enjoy reading it as well. But the grace period of defining your limits, has long flown for me. I think it happened when I read Story of the Eye by Georges Bataille. I think that was the work of transgression that sort of really marked the space in which I knew I would, just thrive with all of this brutal imagination. So that happened to me long ago, and I've been reading books of this kind for years since. And so I find that the primary function that a book like this is meant to offer is no longer being performed for me when I read it. When I read it, I'm no longer concerned with seeing if something is going to shock me or traumatize me, because I know it's not going to, because reading doesn't really do that for me. But instead, I find that my reading eye is sort of looking for this wondrous, fascinating depiction of the dark side of humanity, told in a moving and sincere and powerful way. And I find that, of course, extreme horror is not concerned with that. They're more concerned with knowing the limits of what you can put on a page and trying to transgress against that as much as possible. There's not a lot room left for all these lofty concerns about what the nature of violence is and all that. You can get glimpses of that. Like I said, this is it has a heavy psychological edge to it, but like I said, that the heavy psychological edge still does nothing for me, because it's just told to move along with some kind of horror story, right? And it's not lingering there. It's not letting you fester there with the synastry of the nature of these characters. Like something like The Necrophiliac by Gabriel Witkop, who fully inhabits the mind frame of the necrophiliac main character that she's writing about, and doesn't let up and is not concerned with telling us a story, but offering us an experience. And I think that is the crucial difference between these two modes of storytelling. Something like Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana is concerned with telling us a story, of moving a plot along. With something like The Necrophiliac by Gabriel Witkop is more interested in placing us in a situation. It's more interested in getting us to vicariously experience the rot and stench of the situation that she's built right in front of our eyes. And I find that I get much more out of inhabiting that mind frame, and with a critical eye sort of extracting meaning out of that appalling experience, versus just reading a plot move along and trying to make meaning of it that way. That is not as successful for me as the former. So I don't know if that made any sense. I hope it did. And like I said, I'm not shitting on these books. I think that they are crucial in the process of taste making and limit defining, like I said. But that is a purpose that I no longer need myself personally. So I don't know where my future lies with extreme horror. I mean, I still, especially if indie authors reach out to me, asking for review requests, I'll still read it. Like I said, it's still a distant cousin to the kind of transgressive fiction that I enjoy. And I want to support authors who are endeavoring to satiate this more sinister imagination that they've found themselves haunted by. And so if extreme horror authors reach out to me asking for a review request, I'll be happy to oblige. But I mean, always knowing that I'm gonna be honest about it and let you know what I truly thought. And as you know, my streak with extreme horror has not been very good, but that's okay. It's just not for me, right? It's just not for me. So yeah, let me know. What mode of disturbing storytelling are you most likely to lean towards? What disturbing books have you enjoyed in the past, and have they been these more typical indie extreme horror titles? What do you like about books like this? Don't be scared of disagreeing with me in the comments. I mean, obviously, I'm aware that this video is going to cause some disagreement, and I want to engage with that disagreement because understanding the audience for books like this to me is just as crucial as understanding the extreme and transgressive fiction that I like. So let's talk. I'm not an asshole, I promise. I can be, but I'll try not to be. But yeah, I'm just really, really interested, if you've enjoyed books of this kind, for you to just give me your words on what you've enjoyed about it and see if I'm right. See if maybe my assessment has some truth to it, or maybe this whole video is bullshit. I don't know. But I hope you're all well. Continue to stay safe, and I will see you on the next one.